talk today about contextualism. It's an approach to the theory of knowledge, and specifically to problems of skepticism, that has become popular since Keith DeRose wrote a paper on it, defending this as a view and as a response, in fact a solution to the skeptical problem a few years ago. But it's something that has ancient roots. There are a number of ancient philosophers who I think described something like this response. Maybe it's most explicit in Gangesha, a medieval Indian philosopher, who develops an account that is rather like this. I think it also has echoes in Wittgenstein and a variety of other people. So let's take a look at the contextualist analysis. Knowledge is contextual. In other words, whether a belief counts as knowledge is not something we can give a general across-the-board account of. It's something that depends on the context. So, what do I mean? I mean something like this. There's a scale, and somewhere up here, we are willing to count beliefs as knowledge. Down here, we say, well, it's mere belief, it's mere opinion. It doesn't count as knowledge. And so I will use the term opinion to mean belief that doesn't count as knowledge. Now, at some point in here, we draw a line. We say above the line, that counts as knowledge. Below that line, it's opinion. It's not known. And what does it take for a belief to be above the line and count as knowledge? Well, we can have different accounts. The internalist says it's a question of justification as well as true belief. And the externalist says it's a true belief that arises from a reliable process, for example, or has a reliable source, or is causally related to the fact that it's about in the right way, or is such that you wouldn't believe it if it weren't true, or you believe on the basis of reasons that are connected appropriately to the truth of your belief, or whatever. There's an account that involves some relationship between that belief and something in the world other than simply the fact that it's true. Now, however we think of things that way, we think there's something that constitutes this bar. But notice the internalist and the externalist in that case are both committed to drawing a line. Do you have a justification? Did it arise from a reliable source? Is this the kind of thing that is the causal result, is the effect of the fact that it's about? Those are things that would allow us to establish an absolute line. The contextualist says it's not like that. The context can move this bar up or down. Sometimes it's quite low, sometimes it's quite high. And context determines that. So this line can shift. It's something that is capable of going up. It can also go down. And that's crucial to understanding what knowledge is. Knowledge is a belief that's true, but also is just good enough in that context. Now, what exactly good enough means? Well, there's a lot more that could be said about that. You could talk about various ways of understanding what it is to be good enough, maybe in terms of the strength of a justification or the strength of the knowledge source. There are many ways in which an internalist or an externalist might try to build context into their account. But I want to notice that this is the kind of thing that many skeptics throughout the ages have seemed to presuppose in the background. Nagarjuna, for example, says, we don't speak without accepting for practical purposes the workaday world. In other words, he's giving you skeptical arguments, claiming there's no such thing as knowledge. But he's not saying, stop living your life. He's saying, yeah, I don't mean to challenge for practical purposes the workaday world. Of course you're going to walk around assuming there are causal connections, forming beliefs on the basis of what you're perceiving, counting them as knowledge in those contexts. That's okay. I want to say they're not real knowledge. Hume says something like the same thing. I'm giving you arguments for doubting that there are real causal connections in the world. But then I'm going to go out of the seminar room and I'm going to go back to playing billiards, and there I'm going to assume that moving the cue stick in the right way will cause the balls to move in a certain way. I forget about my skeptical worries and I go back to that in that context. Something like that is in Sextus Empiricus too. Adhering then to appearances, we live in accordance with the normal rules of life, undogmatically, seeing we can't remain wholly inactive. Ancient sources tell us of a skeptic who became so extreme into skepticism that he simply refused to believe the evidence of his senses, refused to believe there were any causal connections in the world, refused, in other words, to believe that any belief that he had counted as knowledge or was the basis for action. This is someone who would routinely walk in front of chariots. His students had to lead him around. He decided that there was no point in speaking because there was no reason to believe that anyone else could actually understand his words or respond, that he was ever communicating, and so he took to remaining silent. Well, that didn't last very long. People thought he had gone deaf. They started shouting at him to try to make themselves heard. Finally, he took to wiggling his finger to indicate, "I've heard you," and conveyed somehow to some of his students who were able to realize, oh, he's doubting even communication, there's no point. But of course, it's a lie. I mean, the wiggling of the finger then communicated something. And so really, the attempt to, fully live as if you had no beliefs and no reason for any beliefs didn't really quite work out. Miles Bernier has asked in a famous paper, can the skeptic live his skepticism? And most skeptics throughout the ages have said, no, not really. As soon as I leave philosophical reflections, I count things as well known enough to get by for practical purposes. In effect, you might say, from a contextualist point of view, they're saying, look, here's where the bar really ought to be, but in the practical workaday world, I lower it here. I lower it to this point when I'm playing pool or walking down the street or in other ways having to actually function in the world. There are a number of questions we can ask about this basic picture. One question to ask concerns the motion of this bar. What moves it up? What moves it down? So we could say, first question is, what moves the bar? What makes our criteria for knowledge or reasonable belief? After all, the ancient skeptics were not really primarily concerned with knowledge at all. They were concerned with what makes a belief reasonable. But we could make the same point with respect to that. We could say, these might be reasonable beliefs. These are, well, maybe unreasonable beliefs if you go far enough down, maybe otherwise just opinion, mere opinion. They're not really on the basis of reason. And so I think nothing crucial here hangs on the term knowledge. It won't do to say, okay, forget knowledge, but we can have a different kind of account of reasonable belief. The same thing should apply here too. Reasonableness might be a matter of degree. In any case, something is going to move the bar up, move the bar down in various contexts. What is that? What allows Hume to say in the seminar room we have one set of rules, when I play billiards, I've got another set of rules? Or for Nagarjuna to say, yes, when we're acting as Buddhist philosophers, we have one criterion, but the bar moves way down in the workaday world. How does that go? What moves the bar? And the second question is, well, what effect does it have when we move the bar? We move it up. What survives up here? What's up there? What survives as knowledge or as reasonable belief? We move it down. Well, what do we gain? So it's not just a question of what moves the bar, it's a question of what changes as a result. What, if anything, survives all the moving up? And you might say, what in general gets thrown out or gets admitted if we move the bar up or down? Now, those are critical questions, and contextualists can give different kinds of answers to that. Maybe some think some things are going to count as knowledge or as reasonable belief in any possible context, no matter how far up you move the bar, those things survive. Some may say, look, no matter how far down you move the bar, some things are mere opinion or highly unreasonable beliefs that are never going to count as good enough. And so there's considerable plausibility to both of those. So you might think at some point here, there's really a hard and fast limit. And that would be a third question, you might say, connected to these two. Are there limits to how far the bar can move in either direction? There might well be. In fact, there probably are. Now, I want to focus on the question, what moves the bar up in particular? Because the skeptic, from this point of view, is playing a weird game with us. We say, I know that the shirt has pink stripes. I know, when I'm at the zoo, say, that I'm looking at a zebra. Seems plausible enough. But now, with respect to the zebra, someone says, are you sure? That could be a cleverly painted mule. And I sort of say, well, gosh, zebras and mules do look a lot alike. There's different coloring. A mule tends to be brown and zebras are black and white stripes. But if somebody painted that mule black and white, I might well think it's a zebra. So suddenly say, well, gee, I don't know. And so raising that kind of skeptical hypothesis is something that can make me start doubting. Or with respect to the shirt, somebody might say, are you sure your color perception is right? Or might say much more radically, are you sure that there isn't a Cartesian demon out to deceive you about everything, tricking you constantly? Maybe there is no external world at all. Maybe there is no shirt. Maybe there is no Daniel who is speaking into this camera right now. Well, gee, do I know that I'm not the victim of a Cartesian demon? I don't know, maybe not. So in short, if we think about what moves the bar, and in particular, what moves it up, we can think, well, what do those things have in common? Someone says, hey, that might be a cleverly painted mule. I say, oh, I hadn't thought about that. Or someone says, there might be a demon out to deceive you about everything. Maybe there's no external world at all. So, oh, I never thought about that. So there are a number of things we can say. One thing that seems to raise the bar up is, well, a skeptical hypothesis. Someone says, but this might be a visual illusion. Or you might be a brain in a vat. You might be trapped in the matrix. There might be a Cartesian demon. Or maybe it's simply a matter of you hallucinating. Maybe you're dreaming. Maybe this external world doesn't exist at all. Maybe your perceptual faculties are completely messed up today. Well, whatever it is, a skeptical hypothesis arises. And that's intimately connected to another thing that seems to happen when that arises, which is doubt. Suddenly I begin to doubt. I say, I hadn't thought about that possibility. I didn't think about the fact that it could be a cleverly painted mule. I didn't think about the fact that I could be a brain in a vat, and so forth. Here's the way DeRose thinks about this. He says, in order to have knowledge, or I think we could also say, in order to have a reasonable belief, I have to be able to exclude relevant alternatives. So, I think here are ways the world could be. And I think for me to know something, I have to be able to exclude things that are relevant, that are outside of this. So let's say I claim I know that that the shirt has stripes, for example. And then I've got to be able to exclude these other possible situations that are not P. Now, presumably some of these, in ordinary context, I consider irrelevant. I say, look, Cartesian demon, there I am in the store picking out shirts. And I say, well, I like this one. And somebody says, well, what if there is no shirt? What do you mean? It's right here. No, but what if the external world doesn't exist at all? You're buying nothing. I say, Now, ordinarily, when I'm in the store shopping for a shirt, that is not a relevant consideration. I don't think, I do think, do I like this shirt? Is it worth this amount of money? I don't stop and think, but what if the shirt doesn't really exist because I'm just a brain in a vat? Then I'm completely wasting my money. That never occurs to me. That's an irrelevant alternative. But if somebody brings that up and says, are you sure? Are you sure you even exist, that you have a body, that there are shirts? Well, suddenly they're trying to get me to expand the range of relevant alternatives. So one way of looking at this is to say, I ordinarily think of these alternatives as relevant, and I think I have to be able to exclude these. No, my eyes seem to be working fine. I'm not colorblind or anything. It's all good. But then somebody says, but what about this? So in effect, by bringing up a skeptical hypothesis, we're saying, what if it's a cleverly painted mule? What if the external world doesn't exist? They're expanding that group of relevant alternatives. Here's one way to think about what happens when someone introduces this kind of skeptical hypothesis or other reason for doubt. We think about these relevant alternatives, and we think, okay, ordinarily, I think I can rule out the relevant alternatives here that would contradict my belief. I think, oh no, I know what a zebra is, for example. I know that, that has stripes, it looks like that. That's a zebra. Okay, but then somebody says, what if it's a cleverly painted mule? And that's a possibility I hadn't considered. That's out here somewhere. And here's my mule. And now I think, oh dear, okay. So I've got this belief here, and I think, hold on a second. I would believe it if that were the case, okay? So, shoot, maybe I don't know it after all. So what's happening when someone introduces a doubt or introduces a skeptical hypothesis is that they're putting something into the class of relevant alternatives, or to put it another way, they're expanding the relevant alternatives in such a way that I start thinking, oh, wait a minute, maybe that is a relevant alternative. Gee, I don't have a way of excluding that, and so maybe I don't know. Maybe, given what I've been thinking, shoot, I would still believe it, even if that were true, so maybe I'd better withdraw my belief, or at least recognize that I'm not going to count it as knowledge. I won't count it as a fully reasonable belief. Are there other kinds of things that can raise the bar? Well, sure. One of them is disagreement. I think that's a zebra. And somebody says, oh, no, I've been studying African animals. That's not a zebra. That's a close relative of the zebra. Blah, blah, blah. I think, I didn't know there was a close relative of the zebra. And in that kind of case, I'm going to say, yeah, okay, wow, I'm pretty sure that is a zebra. I think I saw the sign over there. It said zebra. Really? Because So in short, there can be disagreements. As I'm speaking, we're in the midst of coronavirus, and in the context of that, there have been all sorts of disagreements, even among medical experts, let alone the general population. How contagious is this? How high is the death rate? What's the best strategy for combating it? How likely is it that this particular treatment is going to be successful? All of those things are cases where people disagree. And so I might have beliefs about this, but suddenly the disagreement of someone else with me makes me think, okay, maybe that belief that I thought was justifiable isn't really well supported enough to count as knowledge. And so disagreements, especially disagreements that are hard to resolve. It's one thing if we can say, hey, look at the sign, it says zebra. Then maybe it's a disagreement that's easy to resolve. But other disagreements might not be like that. They might be hard to resolve. And when somebody who seems reasonable and has good evidence and decent arguments disagrees with us, that raises the bar and makes us think, okay, maybe I don't know after all. Are there other considerations? Well, one of the most important is high stakes. Here's an example from the recent literature. Someone asks me whether the bank is open, and I say, yeah, sure. They don't close until 4:30. And then the person says, are you really sure? If I don't get this payment in on time, I'm going to be in default in my mortgage. I'm going to lose my house. Then suddenly say, oh, well, I better check. Okay? Ordinarily, I would say, yeah, I know when the bank closes. But in this circumstance, I think, oh dear, I better make sure. And there are situations like that where the stakes matter a lot. Ordinarily, we count certain things as known because, look, it's good enough, right? It's good enough for the workaday world. It's good enough for playing billiards and so forth. But if suddenly someone says, but your life depends on it, they ask me what the capital of Malaysia is, and I say Kuala Lumpur. Yeah, I'm pretty confident of that. But someone says, now, they point a gun at my head and they say, I will shoot you if you are wrong about that. Are you sure it's Kuala Lumpur? Now, suddenly, I get scared, right? That raises the bar and I start worrying about it. So that's the kind of context of extremely high stakes that makes me worried. There might be contexts like that lower the bar, either because the stakes are very low or simply because there is no disagreement, there is no doubt, and maybe in some cases like this, it's not just a question of all those things, but really all that matters is getting the right answer. It doesn't matter how you got it. It doesn't matter how reasonable it was or whether it really counted as knowledge. Good example. I'm playing in a trivia contest. I'm part of a team, and one of the questions is, what's the Latin word for whatever? Well, I stop and think about that. Nobody else at the table knows. In fact, several of them start proposing things that are not even in Latin. Say, no, that's not Latin, that's Spanish, that's Italian. And do I know? Well, it's not like I knew it like that. But I think, well, I know what whoever is. It's quisquid. So what's whatever? Well, just as quis would be who, quid would be what. So I think it must be quid quid. So I say, it's quid quid. And that turned out to be right. Did I know? Well, I was inferring it, right, based on what I knew. I didn't remember it right off the bat. If you said, are you sure? I would have said no. However, I got it right. And so, yay, you knew. Well, did I know? It depends what the bar is, right? In that situation, it's pretty low. For one thing, the stakes aren't particularly high. For another thing, there was no disagreement. The other people had bizarre suggestions. I had some reasons in support of it and so forth. But I was far from certain. But in that case, you come up with the right answer. We tend to be inclined to think, look, knowledge may not just be true belief, but it's pretty close to true belief. If, on the other hand, a lot depended on it, all of a sudden, then I might say, look, I don't know, but here's something that it might be. And so a lot of things determine this bar going up and down by, in effect, putting things into or removing things from that set of relevant alternatives. Now, what's the relevance of this to the skeptical problem? Here's one way of thinking of what the skeptic's doing. The skeptic is raising that bar dramatically, is saying, by bringing in all sorts of wild, relevant alternatives, not just what if that's a cleverly painted mule, but what if there's a Cartesian demon? What if you're a brain in a vat? What if there is no external world? What if we're trapped in the matrix? And all of those are sort of wild hypotheses. Now, ordinarily, you might say, I don't think about those possibilities at all. In shopping for shirts, I don't think, what if the whole external world is a fiction, a figment of my imagination? What if I'm a brain in a vat, etc.? I don't think about any of that. Those seem irrelevant. But if someone suddenly brings them up, they are in effect raising that bar dramatically. Now you might think, do I know? Well, you know what? When I'm in the clothing store, or when Hume is playing billiards, or when the guardian is in the workaday world, sure, I know. But in a context where people introduce this kind of hypothesis or worry about the source of sources of knowledge and all of that, suddenly that bar gets raised way up. And so whether I know, well, I know relative to the standards of the workaday world, maybe I don't know relative to the standards of the philosophy seminar. Now, one possibility is to say, well, as Hume seems to, I don't really know, I just adopt it for practical purposes in the workaday world. But there's another response to say, I don't see why I should raise the bar up that high at all. Why should I? I don't see why that makes me doubt anything. Here, for example, is the complaint of Udayana, a very important figure in the history of Indian philosophy. Udayana is the person who combined the Nyaya and Vaisheshika traditions into something known as Nyaya Vaisheshika, and was really the first figure in a movement then known as the new Nyaya, the new logic, Navya Nyaya. He says, that is doubted concerning which, as doubted, there occurs no contradiction with the doubter's action. In other words, Udayana is saying, look, do you really doubt? Have you really expanded the set of relevant alternatives? I look at what you do. You say, aha, so maybe you are the victim of a Cartesian demon. And look what you do. You pick up the marker and draw something. Puh! If you really believed that it was a possibility that there was a Cartesian demon, you wouldn't bother picking up the marker. You wouldn't draw on the board. You wouldn't think you could communicate anything to anyone. And so he says, your doubt, quote unquote, is belied by your own actions. Gangesha, one of the main figures in the New Logic, a 14th century Indian philosopher, puts it this way. It is not possible at once to resort regularly to fire and the like, for smoke and the like, and to doubt that fire causes it. It would be meaningless behavior. That's how we should understand what Udayana is saying. So, Gangesha is saying, look, you want to grill your steak? You start a fire in the grill. All the while you're telling me that this world might not exist at all. If you really doubt that the world exists, what on earth are you doing starting a fire? You really doubt, as Hume does, that there are causal connections in the world? Why would you think that starting that fire in the grill would produce smoke or cook your steak? You yourself are showing you don't really doubt there's a causal connection. And so, don't give me this stuff. In effect, they say, you're trying to raise the bar. Stop it. Your own actions show that you're not really raising the bar. You're still speaking and expecting me to understand. You're still doing things like using tools, moving around the room. You act as if we all have bodies. You're acting as if there are causal connections. This skepticism is false. It is a faux skepticism. None of this is real. He says we can reject the argument that contradiction, understood as natural opposition, governing precisely which X can't occur along with precisely which Y, can't block a vicious infinite regress. It's the doubter's own behavior that proves the lie to the doubt, that blocks it. The doubter's own behavior blocks the doubt. The skeptic acts as if they're not true skeptics at all. And so, don't take this seriously. They claim that in important philosophical contexts we raise the bar and count only this as knowledge, or only this as reasonable belief, if anything survives at all. But they say, give me a break. Their own behavior shows they don't really doubt it. The bar isn't really being raised. They're pretending to raise it. Wittgenstein says something similar. He says, I can doubt only if I have reason to doubt. You have to give me a reason to doubt. You say, hey, what if there's no external world? What if it's a cleverly painted mule? What if there's a Cartesian demon? Wittgenstein says, well, what reason do I have to take that seriously as a possibility? Why do you think so? Now, it would be one thing if you say, look, I was here at the zoo last night and I saw this crazy artist guy go into the enclosure here and take out his paints and start painting a mule. And I think maybe he led it over and is playing a joke on us. Then it's like, oh, you have reason to think it really might be a cleverly painted mule. It's hard to imagine what might be a reason for thinking there really might be a Cartesian demon, or I might really be a brain in a vat. On the other hand, maybe there could be. Eli Hirsch describes cases like that. Maybe I find out there are lots of people who are brains in vats. Maybe I go into this place in a remote corner of Wyoming where there are huge farms of brains in vats. And I start thinking, wait, a lot of people I've been corresponding with on the internet, for example, a lot of my Facebook friends turn out to be brains in vats. Maybe I'm a brain in a vat. Then I've got a reason for my doubt. But because a philosopher says, what if we are brains in vats? That's no reason for me to take it seriously. So that idea of Udayana's, of Gangesha's, of Wittgenstein's says, look, I'm going to believe that this should be raised and that I should doubt that I have knowledge only if you give me a powerful reason for it. If you tell me, hey, somebody was in that enclosure painting animals, then the possibility it's a painted mule becomes real for me. Then I'll take it seriously. But in the abstract, I'm not going to take it seriously, especially when your own behavior shows you don't take it seriously either.